My name is Monica Bennett. I'm 31. And for almost a decade, I've been the one who smoothed things over in my family. The one who translates my mother's silence and my brother's mistakes into something everyone else can live with. I was standing in my mother's kitchen on a Sunday night in March, rinsing a coffee mug under water that had gone lukewarm, when I heard my name through the half-open door to the dining room. Not spoken to me, spoken about me. My mother's voice, low and certain, the same voice she used when she'd already made up her mind about something. Monica doesn't need it right now. She's fine. You're the one who's struggling. I set the mug down so carefully it didn't even clink against the sink. And before I understood why, before I'd even fully processed what I was hearing, my thumb was already on my phone screen pressing record. I didn't know yet that a 40-second voice memo would end up being the most honest conversation my family ever had. Welcome back to Women Drama Stories. If you're new here, this is the channel for quiet women and the loud truths they finally tell. Hit subscribe before we go on because you do not want to miss how this one ends. For context, I teach 11th grade English at a public high school just outside Dayton, Ohio. I've been there 7 years. It's the kind of job people call a calling, which is a nice way of saying it doesn't pay much, but I love it anyway. My classroom smells like dry erase markers and the industrial coffee from the teacher's lounge, and most days that's the calmest part of my life. My mother, Sharon, raised my brother Caleb and me mostly on her own after our dad moved out when I was 12. She worked 2 jobs for years, and I have never once doubted that she loves us. That's actually what makes this story harder to tell. This isn't about a mother who didn't care. It's about a mother who cared so much about one child that she stopped noticing what it cost the other one. Caleb is 27. He's charming in that way that gets him forgiven for things I'd never get forgiven for. He's had 4 jobs in 3 years, not because he's lazy, but because something always seems to fall apart right when things start going well for him. My mother has always had a name for it. He's sensitive. He takes things hard. I used to believe that too. I've been saving money for 4 years. Slowly, carefully, a little from every paycheck into an account I barely mentioned to anyone, not because it was a secret exactly, but because in my family, money you don't talk about is money that stays yours. By that March I had just under $39,000. It wasn't for a house. It wasn't for a wedding. It was my way out of a relationship I hadn't found the courage to leave yet. I should probably mention Derek here because he matters later. We'd been together 3 years, living together for 2. On paper he looked good. Steady job, polite to my mother, remembered my birthday. In practice he had a way of narrowing every decision in my life down to what he approved of, and I had gotten so used to it that I didn't call it what it was. I called it, "We're just different." Looking back, I know exactly what it was. So that savings account wasn't just money. It was the first thing in years that was entirely quietly mine. Which is why standing in that kitchen, hearing my own name used like a bargaining chip, felt like the floor tilting under me. I want to walk you through exactly what I heard because the details matter. Caleb had lost his job again 2 weeks earlier, this time from an auto parts distributor, and he'd been staying at Mom's for what he called, "just until I figure things out." I'd heard this phrase from him before. I'd stopped keeping count of how many times. Through the door I heard him say something I couldn't quite make out, his voice tight, almost embarrassed. Then my mother, gentler now. "I know you don't want to ask me, but I've got a way to help without it coming out of my retirement." A pause. The clink of her setting down her wine glass. "There's still Monica's account. The one from when she was in school. I never took my name off it." My stomach dropped in a way I can only describe as physical, like missing a stair in the dark. "She's not using it for anything urgent," my mother went on. "You need it more than she does right now." I stood there with dish soap drying on my hands and listened to my mother describe my future like it was spare change she'd found in a coat pocket. I want to be honest with you. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was a strange, cold calm, the kind that shows up right before your brain understands what your body already knows. That's when I hit record. Not because I had a plan. I didn't. I think some part of me just needed proof for myself that I hadn't imagined it. Here's a truth I've learned the hard way. The people who love us the most can still be the ones who see us the least. I didn't say anything that night. I dried my hands, walked back into the dining room with a smile stapled onto my face, and finished dessert like nothing had happened. I drove home with both hands tight on the wheel and didn't cry until I was sitting in my own driveway with the engine off, listening to the tick of it cooling down. And I still had no idea that the account my mother was talking about so casually wasn't even something I could just quietly protect. Because as I'd find out 3 days later, she wasn't just talking about my money. Legally, she still had a claim to it. For the next few days, I went through the motions. Grading papers. Grocery shopping. Nodding along while Derek talked about his coworkers over dinner. But underneath all of it, my brain kept circling back to something I hadn't thought about in years. This wasn't actually the first time. When I was 19 in my second year of community college, I'd had almost $3,000 saved from a summer job and a small scholarship stipend, money I was planning to use for textbooks and a laptop that actually worked. My mother asked to borrow most of it for Caleb, who was 16 at the time and wanted to go to a baseball camp he insisted would change his life. I said yes because saying no to my mother wasn't something I knew how to do yet. That money never came back. Nobody ever brought it up again. I told myself it didn't matter. I was young. It was one time. Except now I understood it hadn't been one time. It had been the first time I noticed a pattern that had probably always been there. I brought it up with my mother 2 days after the dinner carefully, the way you test ice before you put your full weight on it. I didn't mention what I'd overheard. I just asked casually if she still had access to that old account from when I was in school. She didn't even hesitate. Oh, probably. I never bothered taking myself off it. Why? Just curious, I said. She looked at me a beat too long. You're not in some kind of trouble, are you? No. I was just thinking about consolidating accounts. Well, don't overthink it, she said, already turning back to the dishes. It's not like anyone's touching it. I remember standing there thinking you already have. That conversation told me 2 things. 1, she genuinely didn't see anything wrong with what she'd said in that dining room. And 2, if I wanted the truth about where I stood, I was going to have to find it myself instead of waiting for her to hand it to me. So I did what I do best. I got organized. I pulled up the old account online that weekend, something I honestly hadn't logged into in years. And there it was right under account holders. My name. And hers. Cosigner added when I was 17 because I was a minor when we opened it. Nobody had ever removed her. Legally, she could have walked into that credit union and withdrawn every cent without my signature. She hadn't done it yet. But she'd been talking about my money to my brother like she already had the right to. I sat there in my kitchen with my laptop open, feeling something shift in my chest, from hurt into something sharper and more useful. I still didn't say anything to her. Not yet. Because 2 days later, something happened that I genuinely wasn't prepared for. Caleb showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening, which he never does. He stood on my porch in his old college hoodie, hands jammed in his pockets, not quite looking at me. Can I come in for a minute? I let him in. He sat on the edge of my couch like he was ready to leave at any second. I think Mom talked to you, he said. About the account. I didn't answer right away. What did she tell you? That there was money from when you were in school. That she could help me with it. He rubbed the back of his neck. I told her I didn't want to ask you directly. I knew how that would sound. But you let her ask for you. He flinched at that just slightly. I lost my apartment, Monica. Not just the job. I'm 2 months behind and my landlord's already talking eviction. I didn't know what else to do. And here's the thing I wasn't ready for. He looked ashamed. Genuinely uncomfortably ashamed. In a way I'd never actually seen from him before. Caleb has always had an easy confidence about asking for things, like the world owed him a soft landing. This wasn't that. This was a 27-year-old man who'd run out of easy answers and hated himself a little for it. I'm not asking you to give me anything, he said quietly. I just wanted you to hear it from me instead of finding out some other way. I believed him. That's the complicated part. My anger wasn't really at Caleb, not entirely. He hadn't taken anything. He hadn't even asked me directly. The person who'd made a decision about my money without asking me a single question was still my mother. But I'll admit, sitting across from my brother that night, watching him struggle to hold eye contact with me, softened something in me I wasn't expecting to feel. I told him I needed some time to think. He nodded like he'd expected that answer, and left the way he'd come in, quiet, smaller than usual. I thought that conversation would be the hardest part of that week. I was wrong. 2 nights later, Derek found the printed bank statement I'd left on the kitchen counter. The one from the credit union with my mother's name still listed on it. "Why do you still have your mom on this?" he asked, holding it up like evidence. "I'm dealing with it," I said. "Dealing with what? Is this the money you keep saying you don't have for the kitchen remodel?" I hadn't told him about the remodel comment being a cover story. I hadn't told him a lot of things. "It's just an old account, Derek." He set it down slowly, watching my face the way he did when he thought I was hiding something, which, to be fair, I was. "You've been weird all week. Is there something you're not telling me?" I looked at him standing in our kitchen, in the apartment we shared, in the relationship I'd been quietly saving my way out of for 4 years, and I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Trapped from 2 directions at once. My mother thought my money existed to fix my brother's problems. My boyfriend thought my privacy existed to be explained to him. "I'm just tired," I said. "I want you to notice that I didn't tell him the truth." I've thought about that a lot since. "I'm just tired" wasn't a lie exactly. It just wasn't the whole sentence. The whole sentence was, "I'm tired of being the only person in my life who has to explain herself." I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning before school, I drove to Miami Valley Credit Union on my lunch break instead of eating. I sat across from a loan officer named Patrice, who'd clearly seen this exact situation more times than I probably wanted to know, and asked how to remove a cosigner from an account I'd opened as a minor, now that I was well past 18. "You'll need her signature? Or you can close this account and open a new one solely in your name," Patrice said. "Given your balance, I'd actually recommend the second option. Cleaner. Faster." I remember sitting there with my hands flat on my knees, very still. The way I get when I'm trying not to let my face show how much something matters. "Let's do that." Took less than an hour. New account. My name only. The balance moved over that same afternoon. I didn't tell my mother. Not that day. I know some of you are already wondering if that was the end of it, if I just quietly protected my money and walked away clean. I wish it had been that simple. Because 2 weeks later, I found out something that made this entire situation far more complicated than I expected. I was at my mother's house helping her sort through old boxes in the garage, something we'd been putting off for over a year, when I found a folder of hospital paperwork from when Caleb was 14. I hadn't thought about that year in a long time. Caleb had a severe asthma attack that spiraled into pneumonia so quickly that by the time my mother got him to the ER, his oxygen levels had dropped low enough that a doctor used the words, "We almost lost him," in front of both of us. I remember sitting in a hospital hallway in my school uniform, 12 years old, watching my mother's face go a color I'd never seen on her before. I hadn't realized until I read through those old papers how much of that had been about timing. My mother had waited almost a full day before taking him in, thinking it was just a bad cold. There was a note from a follow-up appointment, a doctor gently suggesting that earlier intervention would have prevented the worst of it. My mother had never talked about that guilt out loud. Not once in 17 years. But sitting in that garage, I finally understood something about her that I'd been too close to see my whole life. Every time Caleb stumbled, some old, unspoken part of her still saw that hospital hallway. She wasn't just spoiling him. She was still trying to make up for a mistake she'd never forgiven herself for. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it explained it. And there's a difference between those two things that took me a long time to understand. I sat with that for almost a week before I decided what to do with it. I want to tell you honestly that I thought about confronting her at that dinner table, in front of everyone, playing that recording out loud and watching her face change in real time. Part of me wanted that. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that wasn't actually what I wanted. I didn't want to humiliate my mother. I wanted her to understand what she'd actually said, in a way she couldn't argue her way around. So I asked her to meet me alone on a Thursday afternoon at her kitchen table, the same one where all of this had started. She made tea. I remember the small sound of the kettle, the way steam curled up past the window over her sink. "You've been distant," she said, before I'd even said anything. "Is everything okay?" "I need to play you something," I said. I set my phone on the table between us and pressed play. Her own voice filled the kitchen. "Monica doesn't need it right now. She's fine. You're the one who's struggling. There's still Monica's account." the one from when she was in school. I never took my name off it. She's not using it for anything urgent. You need it more than she does right now. I watched my mother's face go through something I can only describe as a slow collapse. Not dramatic, just quiet and total. Like watching a building settle after years of unnoticed cracks. I didn't mean it like that, she said finally, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I know you didn't mean it to sound cruel, I said. But I need you to hear how it actually sounded. Because I did. She started to explain, the way she always does, reaching for context, for Caleb's landlord. For how scared she'd been for him. I let her get partway through before I said the thing I've been carrying since that garage. I found the hospital paperwork. From when he was 14. She went very still. I know that scared you in a way you never really talked about, I said. And I understand that fear more than you think I do now. But Mom, I'm not the account you can borrow against to make up for it. I'm your daughter too. She didn't say much after that. I don't think she had the words yet. Some conversations don't end with an apology that fits neatly into a sentence. Sometimes they just end with two people finally telling each other the truth, and sitting with how uncomfortable that truth is. I told her the account had already been moved into my name alone. She nodded slowly like she'd already guessed. I'm not trying to punish you, I said, standing up. I just needed you to actually know what you did. Not the version where it made sense in your head. The real one. I left before either of us could turn it into an argument. Some truths land harder in silence than they ever could in a fight. In the weeks that followed, I made two decisions that had been quietly waiting for me for a long time. The first was easier than I expected. I put down a deposit on a small one-bedroom apartment across town, using money I'd finally fully stopped feeling guilty about protecting. The second was harder. I told Derek I was moving out. He didn't take it well, at first accusing me of hiding money from him, then softening into something almost pleading, asking what he'd done wrong. I thought about that question for a long time before I answered it, because I wanted to be fair to him. You didn't do one big thing, I told him. You just made me feel like I always had to explain myself to be allowed to have something that was mine. I'm done explaining. I've learned that love isn't supposed to require a defense. If you have to justify keeping something for yourself, it was never really respected as yours to begin with. Moving my own boxes into that new apartment 3 weeks later, I remember standing in the empty living room, sunlight coming through a window with no curtains yet, and feeling something I hadn't felt in longer than I could name. Not triumphant. Just quiet. Like I'd finally put something down that I'd been carrying for years without realizing how heavy it was. A few of you have asked in comments on other stories like this one, what happens to the people left behind after a moment like that? So here's where things stand now, a little over a year later. Caleb found steady work at a logistics company, and to his credit, he's kept it. We talk more than we used to, actually, now that I'm not carrying quiet resentment into every conversation. He apologized on his own without me asking, for letting our mother speak for him instead of coming to me directly. I believe he meant it. My mother and I are still rebuilding. She's never going to be a woman who says everything perfectly, and I've stopped expecting that from her. But she asks now instead of assuming. Small things. Whether it's okay to mention money at all. Whether I'm comfortable with a conversation before she starts it. It's not everything. But it's honest, and honest is worth more to me now than smooth ever was. I'm not the family translator anymore. I let people sit in their own misunderstandings sometimes, and it turns out the world doesn't end when I do. So tell me, if you were in that kitchen and heard your own name used like that, would you have hit record too? Or would you have found a different way to protect yourself? If this story meant something to you, comment the word boundaries and let me know you made it to the end. This story is a work of fiction. Names, characters, and events are products of the author's imagination and are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental.